This is Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball discussion, hosted by Inside the Hall founder and editor, Alex Bozich. Since 2007, Inside the Hall has been trusted by IU fans across the globe to be the one-stop shop for IU basketball news, commentary, and analysis. Join us over at InsideTheHall.com. That's InsideTheHall.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, and pleased to be joined this week by Inside the Hall co-founder, co-editor Ryan Corazza, and also Eamonn Brennan of The Athletic to help us make sense of what's going on right now with IU basketball, which there seem to be a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, and I would say a lot of disappointment within the fan base just based on how things have gone this season. Ryan, I'll start with you. You watch the games as closely as anybody, same as I do. 5 straight losses now. It basically feels like, I've said this in the last couple of podcasts. To me, it's gotten less about the actual games themselves and more about the big picture of the program, where it's headed, the results so far, because the games are all, for the most part, the same at this point. Indiana is good enough not to get blown out in most cases, but not good enough to win also in most cases. Ryan, the Purdue game, 7 straight losses for Archie Miller against the arch rival. What did you see there? And just overall, the direction that this season's heading seems like it could be coming to a conclusion on Thursday night.
Yeah, well, in terms of Purdue, it was a game where Purdue did not bring its best effort and didn't really play that great, and still Indiana really was never quite in the game. They had their opportunities for sure, but I think overall, anytime they had a chance to, get even or break even, they just weren't able to do it. And I think a lot of that speaks to these, I would say, they're newfound 3-point shooting problems, because it did seem like this season that they were finally going to break through and have an above average 3-point shooting at one point in the season. And it was not that long ago. I think it was maybe after the Minnesota win that they were in the top 100 nationally in 3-point shooting. And since then it's really cratered, and it's like gone back to what we've been used to under Archie Miller. And I think like the most confounding thing about it is how, as I looked at it in that film session, and Archie Miller talked about after the game too, that they're 1 of 13 in the first half, and out of those 12 misses, only 1 was a bad shot. And you look at the 12, you look at the 11 that were good shots that they missed. They were wide open looks in transition, Trace Jackson-Davis getting a bunch of attention, kicking it out. They're all good looks, and Elderman airballed one of those. Anthony Leal hit nothing but the backboard. It's like the how they're missing these is really quite something. And it's coinciding with these last 3 games. The shooting has been terrible. I think teams are not as afraid to really show more attention to Trace Jackson-Davis as a result, and it's really hurting them in terms of the bottom line, which is wins, and they have 5 straight losses now.
So even every week, or I guess not every day, you're doing updating the bubble watch for The Athletic, and we've kind of seen Indiana slide from a bubble team to not even an NIT team at this point. I guess from your perspective, I'm not sure exactly how many games you watch. I'm sure you watch some because you follow all things college basketball. I guess, how surprised are you that this is kind of where Indiana is right now overall in this season, and also as a program? Because I was looking back the other day at some of the things that we did when Archie Miller was hired, and we talked to a lot of national folks about the hire, and I think universally that offseason it was looked at as a good hire, but these things aren't a perfect science, and obviously things maybe don't always translate going from the A-10 to the Big Ten or the mid-major level, whatever. But it seems like the reaction to the hire was overwhelmingly positive. So kind of a 2-parter this season in particular. How surprised are you that it's ended up this way, and also just big picture from an IU perspective, are you surprised at the lack of success for Archie Miller thus far in Bloomington?
Yeah. So the first part this season, I am surprised. I mean, I did our sort of State of the Hoops program feature about Indiana in the summer, and it felt like there was a reasonable amount of confidence having Trace Jackson-Davis back for a sophomore season, bringing in some of the guys they're bringing in, particularly Christian Lander, even though I think Archie was pretty circumspect about, he's young, he's going to have to figure it out. He wasn't like, oh, yeah, we've got a guy who's going to take over the Big Ten or anything like that. He was very sort of cautious about Lander. But, a five-star guy reclassifying is still a pretty big deal. And then just the number of veterans on the team, the number of guys who you would think would be able to figure things out at this point in their career, and to get what is, essentially a less consistent team, a much worse defensive team. I mean, this team is like 12th in the Big Ten in points per trip allowed, which is, supposed to be kind of Indiana's calling card this year. And under Archie Miller in general is like, we're going to play really good pack line defense. And then, offensively, things might get a little bogged down from time to time, but you can live with that because we're going to guard like crazy. Even if we don't have three-point shooting, we're not going to give up anything easy on the other end of the floor. And we've seen other programs have success with that. Obviously, I'm out here in D.C. now. I cover Virginia a fair amount, because they're relatively local here. It's not too hard for me to get down to Charlottesville. And I watched them last year, and they were absolutely horrendous offensively, like painful to watch, but they guarded every single possession like it was the end of their life. And were able to eke out what would have been like a number 7 seed. So I think coming off last year, where I think Indiana was probably going to get in the tournament, to bring back your star player, who's probably one of the 10 best players in college basketball, at least on the offensive end, and to have a pretty veteran group of guys around him, and to be this bad on both ends of the floor, particularly down the stretch of the season when you've got an NCAA tournament bid on the line, it's really surprising and really odd. And I can totally understand why Indiana fans would be really disappointed. For a team to have Trace Jackson-Davis on the roster, beat Iowa twice, and basically be nowhere getting near the NCAA tournament is like, you're really doing some stuff wrong. And so, it's surprising. I think it's very surprising that it's gone this way for Archie Miller, because I would have been one of the people watching his Dayton teams pretty closely over the years. I would have been one of the people who would have thought, this is going to translate. Like, he took some Dayton rosters that were a bunch of dudes 6'5", 6'6" or smaller, and made them viable Atlantic 10 contenders, got them to the NCAA tournament regularly, put some really good teams together at a good program, but one that, recruiting to Dayton, Ohio, with all due respect to to the Daytonians out there, is not the easiest thing in the world to do. They have a great program there and great support, and I love that gym. Like, there's a lot of charm to it, but it's not like you're recruiting to Miami or something. So it was the reason he was universally regarded as sort of an impressive coach on the rise. In addition to what he did at Dayton, you look at what Sean did at Arizona, sort of in their heyday. Things have fallen apart there now, of course, for various reasons. But in terms of building a program that had struggled for a while, but that expected to be a national powerhouse, Sean had shown the way. And I think it's just really surprising 4 years in now that these teams have consistently underachieved and consistently disappointed relative, I think, to their talent level and to especially the expectations of the program in any season. But, it's not like these seasons have been early Tom Crean levels of talent. He's had talented guys. He's recruited well. And I think that's what's extra disappointing, is that it hasn't come together into any sort of coherent whole.
Ryan, there's been a lot written the last couple of weeks. There's going to be even more written the next couple of weeks, I think, as this season comes to an end in terms of big picture and what's next. I'm getting the question every day, what's going to happen with Archie Miller? I have no idea, because obviously these decisions are made at the highest level. There's a lot of financial things to consider. But I'm just thinking of this, looking at it from a results perspective, and I wrote something in 5 Takeaways from Purdue, what Fred Glass said when Archie Miller was hired, kind of what his criteria were, what he was looking for, and 4 seasons in, they're nowhere close to any of those, measuring points, I guess, on his resume. They're nowhere close in terms of being even a top half Big Ten team, in my opinion. They're not going to make the tournament again this year, which is even said they probably were going to make it last year, but people don't want to hear that because no one made it last year. The tournament didn't happen. So the 3 seasons that he's actually had the chance to make it, he hasn't made it. The path forward here to me feels a little murky because, we don't know what the roster is going to look like next year. We've got this whole offseason of probably chaos in terms of the transfer market. My personal opinion is that he's going to get another year. In your mind, kind of what is the path forward here for Indiana and Archie Miller next season? Is there a scenario where he turns this around? What should expectations be next season if he does come in? I'm just kind of curious what you think the appetite is going to be like from the fan base to watch another season of this type of basketball where the results have been very underwhelming.
Yeah, I do think he'll be back next year. I believe it's like a $10 million buyout. And I don't see him going this early. I think I totally get it from like the performance standpoint, right? And I get why people are frustrated. I get why, like kind of any way you slice it, this has just been a disappointment and not up to like even like not the expectations, even if they were a little bit better, that's kind of still not good enough, right? I think it's been, in terms of how they performed, it's been pretty bad. But yeah, with the buyout and with it just, I know this season, I guess for the most part, these are his recruits. It's kind of like the 4th year, and this is in some sense when you'd say, okay, this is your program, this is your team, and if you look at some of the numbers, defensively, this has been their worst year in the Big Ten. They're 12th. And the crazy thing is, his first year, they were 4th with all Greens players. So, and I think they were 9th and then 8th, like the last 2 years. So, in terms of like what things might, how this turns around maybe, or what this looks like next year. Assuming there are like no defections, and I think there has been this large presumption that Trayce Jackson-Davis is definitely leaving. It's been a little bit since I've looked at the NBA boards in terms of like 1st and 2nd round draft picks, but he certainly was not a 1st round pick in anything earlier in the season when he was probably at his best. And I think things have tailed off for him a little bit just because of how he's being defended and sort of what's happening with the team. But if you want to spin it positive, if you get a Parker Stewart in the mix transfer this year, that could help out offensively. You get Christian Lander another year in the program, and he might be able to be more of a net positive when he's on the court. Trayce Jackson-Davis does come back. Armaan Franklin has struggled a bit through 2 different injuries now. And, there was a time this season when he really was able to get his own shot with ease, and kind of like all levels of his game had really risen. And he was a really good player. And I think he's just been slowed by injury. So I don't know. There's like a path where you see the, 5 guys they have on the court, and it seems like it should work. But again, I think to what we've seen so far in all available evidence, like even if it looks or on paper seems like they should be at a certain level, it hasn't happened. And I think if, you run this back again and it goes how it's gone, that after a 5th year of this, the seat could be too hot. It could be on fire, and he'll have to evacuate. So.
Hey, it's Jared. I'm going to jump in here real quick to talk about Home Field Apparel, our friends at homefieldapparel.com. And there are several reasons why you need to go to homefieldapparel.com to upgrade your Indiana University sports wardrobe. Number one, all of their materials are so comfortable. I have the hoodies. I have a crew neck sweatshirt. I just received my LEO t-shirt that they have. And all of the materials are so soft. It feels so good against your body. And what's nice is that they still feel soft even after you wash them. Because a lot of materials, you get them, you wash them, they don't feel as nice. home field apparel stuff really does. So you can count on that. Plus, they have logos there that you're not going to find anywhere else. That's kind of their thing. You know, they have over 90 different schools that they work with now. They go and find these old brand marks and logos and mascots that, you know, haven't been used in 40, 50 years, sometimes longer, and they bring them back. And so it's this great way to indulge your love of nostalgia, find these old logos that you haven't seen. And so when you go there, you'll be able to browse. I mean, for Indiana stuff, they have, you know, 2 pages worth of gear that you can see, stuff on T-shirts, stuff on crew necks, stuff on sweaters, such comfortable stuff. And it's not just IU. You know, you may have people in your life that went to school somewhere else. Sorry for those folks, but, you know, they may have. And you can find so much gear for other schools as well. And even better, you can save when you go there because our promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, will help you save 20% on your entire order. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use that promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and get 20% off your entire order. All right, back to the show.
Eamonn, I want to go back to something you said in kind of your the last time you talked there, but about the talent level. He's had talent, which there's been this narrative for you know, this season that the guards aren't good enough, which I would agree with the guards not being good enough. However, these are guards, with the exception of Al Durham, that he recruited. And so what I'm curious from your perspective is, you said you watched his teams a lot at Dayton. The one thing I've been mostly underwhelmed with this program under Archie is the player development. I can't really, I mean, guys have gotten better over a course of a year, but I haven't seen any like crazy jumps. I mean, Rob Finney, I watched him a lot in high school, and I watched him a ton in AAU, and I looked at him and I said, this is the guy who can, at minimum, be a solid Big Ten starter. He's objectively gotten worse as his career's gone along. There's other guys on this roster who you also feel like just haven't really maximized their potential. What have your thoughts been on player development under Archie? Is it, you know, is that a big issue here? Particularly, I think with shooting is the thing that stands out. It's either he hasn't developed shooting or he hasn't recruited it enough.
Yeah, completely agreed. I mean, I think this is the fundamental thing to keep in mind when you're talking about a coach. Like, I feel like there's always this discussion, like, you know, it happens with my favorite English soccer team, Arsenal. Like, we've got this coach, people are kind of, oh yeah, you know, there's a camp of like, this guy's doing pretty well, but we need to improve the players, and other people thinking a little bit less patient. And the difference is the current coach didn't really pick any of the players. Like, he's kind of making do with what he has. That's not the case in college sports. Like, if the players aren't good enough, that's your fault, because you did a bad job evaluating talent and recruiting them. And so it all comes back to the college coach at the end of the day, and that's why these guys are paid exorbitant salaries by public institutions. So there's not a whole lot of, you know, like sympathy for me for arguments that are like, well, we just need better players. Like, he's a good coach, we just need better players. I haven't heard that much, but if that's out there, like, the players are his, particularly at this point of his tenure. It's the 4th year now. It's not year 1 or even year 2. And I agree with you. Talent development has been a big problem. Guys haven't gotten better, generally speaking. And, you know, I think Trace Jackson-Davis got better this year, but I haven't seen guard play wise guys really improving. I think Rob Finney is the sort of poster boy for this. And I think you look at, you know, at Dayton, his guys did get better. Scoochie Smith is a great example. Like, he's a guy who was there for all 4 of Archie Miller's last 4 years. He came in as a freshman, didn't play hardly at all, was a terrible shooter. And I'm just looking at his stats now. Turned the ball over way more than his assist rate. By his sophomore season, better shooter, making, you know, went from 28% from 3 to 38% from 3, 55% at the free throw line to 75% at the free throw line, assist rate up to 25%, 24% in A10 play, higher than his turnover rate. And those numbers just all keep going up to the point where, as a senior, his offensive rating is in the mid 100, like 113-ish, possession usage rate, shot rate, all way up, assist rate way up. Made 52 threes, like a very good player, a really good A10 point guard for a team that was always going to go to the NCAA tournament. And guys under Archie, Rob Finney, whoever you want to talk about at Indiana have not had these same trajectories, and it is weird. It's odd. I don't think he's doing anything that's probably different, and I guess like Al Durham's gotten better since he was a freshman, but he's kind of plateaued as a senior here. Like, he's been fine, but he hasn't taken a leap in any way, shape, or form. And there are guys that just, some improvement here and there, but not the collective leap that you want to see or expect from veteran teams. So, yeah, I think that's been absolutely a thing that you probably wouldn't have seen coming at Dayton, because, again, at Dayton, there were a lot of teams that he had that were undersized, that you would look at and say, wow, how are you going to guard X, Y, and Z teams playing this way? Or how are you going to generate points on the offensive end? Now, that was 5 years ago, where like small ball and pace and space stuff were not nearly as ubiquitous as they are now, but they weren't really playing that way either. They were just making do, and guys were getting better. And there's a reason why, again, the coach of Dayton was considered such a rising star in the profession. And a lot of that stuff just has not translated to Indiana. And it's, to me, kind of a mystery why. And I think, yeah, there are opportunities next year for guys to get better. I think Christian Lander will get better. I think that's the number one, as Ryan mentioned, that's a good place to look. Early entry guys are like almost universally struggle. I can't remember the last time. Actually, I can't. The only player I can think of and name off the top of my head who reclassified and came to school early and played really well was Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray is like an NBA All-Star, and every other player you can name, whatever program it is, however big, Duke, Kentucky, however good they are at developing talent, those guys almost always struggle because they're supposed to be seniors in high school, and seniors in high school who are not just ridiculously talented like Jamal Murray tend to struggle. So I think Christian Lander will be better next year, but like how much better? And how much will that impact the team, particularly if Jackson Davis isn't there anymore? And so, yeah, I think, to me, the most likely scenario is absolutely him staying another year. There's a $10 million buyout next year versus a $3 million buyout the year after. And, after a pandemic when everybody's revenues are down, and Tom Allen just got a massive extension and became the highest paid coach in the history of Indiana athletics, you can understand the administration being like, well, Archie's got one more year, let's give him one more year, and then the buyout's more manageable after that. I just don't know how much better they're going to get next year. And so I feel like it's worth telling Indiana fans to sort of just like gird their loins for another year of frustration. And maybe that'll be wrong, and maybe he'll excel next year. And then that puts you in a tricky scenario where what do you do after that? It's not very clear cut, but it is extremely weird and frustrating, and the inconsistencies of the team, and like you said, the lack of development from individual personnel.
Eamonn, I'll stick with you, and Ryan, you can chime in on this as well, because I've talked to you about this a lot. And I don't even know if this is a question, Eamonn. I just want your thoughts from watching the games. The one thing, I've talked to Ryan a lot about is Indiana's just not fun to watch play basketball. In Tom Crean's tenure, and say what you want about Tom Crean, that he obviously had his faults as a coach. I don't disagree with the decision to get rid of him, but his teams in year 4, year 5, to an extent, I mean, the year they were number 1, I thought in a lot of cases they played really tight, and like there was a ton of pressure because that was actually what was going on. But the Yogi Ferrell, Thomas Bryant year, those teams were fun to watch. I can't think back in any stretch of the last 4 years of Indiana basketball where there's been any momentum within a season, where they've reeled off, 2, 3, 4 wins. They've gotten hot. It's been fun to watch on a game-to-game basis. It feels like everything is so labored and hard to do within a game. Is that, a function? To me, that's got to be a function of the coach, right? Because the coach is who prepares the guys to play the games. It's what's going on behind the scenes. I think there's been a huge confidence problem. And I say that because, like I said, I've watched a lot of these guys in AAU, and then when they get to Indiana, it's almost like they feel like they're afraid to make a mistake. Do you see the same things in terms of watching the games? It's not aesthetically pleasing at all to watch Indiana play basketball.
No, I mean, it's not an aesthetically pleasing style at all. That would be fine if they were winning, right? Again, referencing Virginia, that is a program that frequently is not aesthetically pleasing to watch. Although, I think they get a bad rap, and, obviously they're really efficient offensively. They run good sets out of timeouts and stuff. That all, if you want to nerd out on basketball, that stuff's all fun to watch, quote unquote. But like as a style of play, they're not Alabama, right? They're not racing up and down the floor, spacing out with 5 guys, getting to the rim or shooting a 3. Like it's just not Virginia is not a traditionally fun. It's Wisconsin basically, except better. It's not a traditionally fun style of basketball. But they win every year, and this year's their 5th ACC title in 8 years, and their fans would never want to see a different. Like if they started running up and down the floor, their fans would be furious. They cheer shot clock violations. Like you can play any way you want to play in college basketball, and that's what's partly what's great about it is the diversity of styles that are viable, as long as you're winning. And the fact that they're not winning is the number one thing. But I also agree with you. If you're into aesthetically pleasing basketball or basketball that is just fun to cover or be around or watch, then Indiana hasn't been that for a while. And labored is a great word. I think it extends to their approach on the offensive end. Feels like everything offensively has to be very difficult and has to come out of 20 seconds or 25 seconds of sides, wheel sets, and all this stuff where you could just run down the floor, play 4 out, and post Jackson Davis and go from there sometimes. Like, it doesn't have to be that hard. The spacing has always felt like an issue. Shot diet, that was a big thing early in the year. I wrote off of the first game against Purdue, and you look at Indiana's shot chart in the second half, and it was just like, what are we doing here? Like, it's not 1960. Like, what kind of shots are you trying to get? And why? There's just all of these things that compile and compound on top of each other where the basketball is not fun. Because it's not fun, it's not free-flowing. It does feel like every offensive possession, guys are really scared to make a mistake. Or if they're not scared to make a mistake, they're just like really grinding their way through these possessions for whatever reason. It's one of those things it's like hard to put your finger on, but over time, like you said, you look back and you think, when was there a time where Indiana went on a run of 3-4 games where they were just playing really well and confidence was high and shots were falling, the defense was good? Like, it just hasn't happened. And there's something there that's hard to classify, but is totally a know it when you see it type of thing. And it's just a struggle. Everything is a struggle. And you would assume to a certain extent with a guy like, again, I keep coming back to this point, but I'm consistently impressed by Trayce Jackson-Davis, even though he's struggled down the stretch. I think his struggles have coincided with them really falling off a cliff. But when Indiana was still treading water and looking like it was going to get in the tournament when they were beating Iowa twice, Trayce Jackson-Davis was one of like the 5 or 6 best players in the country. And you probably shouldn't be on the bubble if you have one of the 5 or 6 best players in the country. Look at Oklahoma State. Like, they came into the year and everyone was thinking Oklahoma State was going to be, maybe a bubble team if they were even eligible for the tournament. No one knew anybody else on their roster except Cade Cunningham. That team has been a lock for the tournament for like 3 weeks now. And you counteract that with the Ben Simmons LSU years. Pretty much everyone agreed that LSU team was really poorly coached. I think you can see the difference there.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I think in terms of style and particularly like offensively and saying things are kind of a struggle or, they're just everything needs to come in terms of like running this wheel action and nothing seems easy. I think one thing to point to with that, and it certainly has been prevalent to me this year, is how much they don't try to really get out in transition. They don't have any easy quick buckets. Like, rarely happens. And part of that is, so they're in the 27th percentile this year for points scored in transition, right? So they're not a team that really gets out and go. And part of that is because, if you even look at, I forget what the name of that site is, but there's video of Archie Miller coaching his offense from like one of his last years at Dayton, I think, and you can maybe even see it on YouTube, but a lot of what they try to do in transition is it's like the big rim running and posting. And so it's not like, let's the guard just we'll take it coast to coast, or, a more modern style where maybe guys are running into the corner and we're hitting 3-pointers off of this. It's like we're actually like almost stopping and looking for a big, and we're trying to get him fouled. So I think that's has led to some of the just, I guess, aesthetic issues, if you want to call it that. And then, going along with that, if there's one thing this team on offense has done consistently, and, you could say has done consistently well, is get to the free throw line. They were 5th in his first year in conference. They were 4th in his second year. And then they were 1st the last 2 years. And if you look nationally this year, they're 6th in the country in free throw rate. Like, this team gets to the line a ton. This is something that is part of what Archie Miller's offense is trying to do. But with that has come 2 problems, I think. The first is they've been terrible from the line. So any gains that they would be getting from getting these easy points at the line really hasn't happened. I mean, they're, I think, nationally they're 288th. They're shooting 67.1% from the line. And I think in conference, this year they're 12th in conference at 67.6%. So, and within getting to the line, I think there is one thing that I don't know, maybe gets discussed a ton, but it stops the game. There's not like, we just ripped a 3. We're going to come back down. We're going to play good defense. Maybe we'll get a steal here and we'll like keep this going. It's like, it's just a stop. And it creates almost like this tension, I feel like, sometimes, because some of these guys, I think, know that when they step up, that they're not really good shooters. And so it's kind of like this compounding factor with the free throw shooting, I feel like, sometimes. And so, that's definitely something where I feel like what they're trying to do is working, but then when they actually get the opportunity to shoot from the line, it really hasn't worked out. So, I think between the free throw shooting, the free throw rate, and then just like not getting anything in transition, it's just the things that could come easy or should come easy just haven't at all. And it's just, it has made things look like a struggle a bit more. And then I think there's sort of like this unknowable factor, which is sort of like more pop psychology with this, but just in terms of like overall confidence, I've seen there's been some of these like clips going around on Twitter this year, like, oh, it was 5 years or whatever, 8 years ago on this day, Indiana went into Michigan State and won or whatever. And you're like seeing these clips of a Jordan Hulls or some other players from IU's past that like, they just look more confident. They look more sure of themselves on the court. They want to take and make every shot. And there is a hesitancy around this offense in particular that I'm not sure I can really point to why it is, but it's been clear there's enough games now in Archie Miller's tenure to know that there's some sort of mental disconnect between just having enough confidence to just keep playing, or if you miss a shot, it's not the end of the world, or just having the confidence to make stuff just doesn't seem like it's there. And I don't know where to point my finger and why that is, but it's certainly there.
Yeah, that kind of meshes with what I was saying earlier about seeing a lot of these guys in high school and the AAU circuit. And obviously that's a different atmosphere. There's a lot more freedom to play a certain way when you're a high school player. But even Romeo Langford, going back to watching his high school season, his last year of high school, I went to pretty much every game. That's how big of a story it was, his recruitment. And then when he got to Indiana, there was so many possessions where it looked like, they didn't have a plan to put him in the best position to succeed, or he was standing in the corner, and these possessions were just, like you said, nothing comes easy, and it seemed like it's they're always laboring to get something done. Eamonn, I want to ask you about just the fan base at Indiana. Obviously, the fan base is the big reason that Ryan and I have continued to be able to do this website for as long as we have. I know you were a part of getting this thing off the ground back in the day, and you're not around it as much on a day-to-day now, but I think sometimes there's this notion that Indiana fans are impatient, or they're maybe a little bit spoiled. They want too much. They haven't been good since the early 90s when Bob Knight had things going. Do you think Indiana is still, a program where, the high levels of success can still be attained, or do you think at this point it's more of an artifact in terms of college basketball? Because I think every year that we move away from having a program that was really successful, you have other programs that have stepped up and become far more consistent in recent times. I mean, I'm looking at this objectively. In the last 20 years, Indiana's maybe the 6th or 7th best program in the Big Ten. That's a pretty long stretch of time. I would argue that it's a sleeping giant that can still kind of reach the highest of highs. But I think there's some people who think it's kind of past its prime and will never maybe get back to what it once was.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think Indiana fans are inherently impatient. I think if they were, they would have looked at the early days of Tom Green's tenure and just been like, this is unacceptably bad. That was a like a depth the program had never sunk to before, and people were willing to stick with it because they understood sort of the circumstances around it. I think it's similar right now too. I think there are a lot of disappointed and frustrated Indiana fans who would be happy to see the back of Archie Miller, but probably also understand like it's probably not going to happen because of the buyout, because of the pandemic, because we have this potentially generational football coach who just, turned Indiana's football program into something people not only care about, but is actually successful. I think I think Indiana fans are generally pretty clued in as much or more than other fan bases. I mean, the appetite for Inside the Hall, it's not just because people want to just smash their face with Indiana content all the time, although that's part of it. It's because they also want more information, and more information, I think, tends to lead to slightly more reasonable points of view. I'm sure there are people out there screaming that Indiana should never be 500 or should never miss the tournament or whatever. But I generally think most reasonable people, at least that interact with me when I tweet about Indiana or whatever the case may be, seem pretty reasonable. I would say that it will be very interesting to see what happens next fall when fans are back in Assembly Hall, because this season and the collapse of this season has taken place behind closed doors with no interaction with fans other than the internet. And that is a big part of the culture of Indiana basketball. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Indiana fans, whether they get a little bit extra vocal if things don't go well next season. What I'll say is absolutely Indiana can be a successful program. That seems like kind of a silly question to me. I know it's been a long time, but I think if Indiana wasn't Indiana and if Indiana was Texas, you'd look at it the same way and be like, wow, that great natural recruiting environment, huge sort of profile within the state in which it exists. Big resources. Indiana doesn't have Texas's resources or Ohio State's resources, but it has Big Ten resources. It has a basically brand new gym and, practice facility, and basically a brand new assembly hall in many ways. It's been re-upped and updated, and it is extremely nice as well. So facilities wise, natural recruiting footprint wise, there's nowhere better in the country you'd rather recruit. Connections to high school coaches, historical sort of cultural cachet, like all of that stuff is still there. It's just you need someone who is really good to sustain it over a long period of time, and really good coaches can do that even without the advantages of programs like Indiana. Really good coaches can take places like Michigan State, which was not a historic, had obviously the Magic Johnson years, but was not a historical power on the level of Indiana when Tom Izzo came along, and they've been good for almost a quarter decade. Again, not to keep going back to this example, but Virginia was like the most mediocre basketball program in the ACC, and they've won 5 ACC titles in the last 8 years. If you have the right coach, absolutely Indiana is a place that can be good again. And to me, it could have far fewer resources than it does, and that could be true.
I do have one question for Eamonn on sort of like looking at this nationally. Like, do you find in terms of programs that have over whatever, the last decade plus or something like that have been consistently successful, like there's like a common denominator for the head coach in terms of like personality or style, or is it just everything's different with how they've gotten the program successful? I'm just wondering if there's like comparing off of programs that actually have been good and successful for a while, if there's like a common denominator that maybe Indiana's missing or not.
That's a really good question. I mean, like, okay, let's look at Ken Palm's program ratings from 1997 to 2020. I just pulled them up. The top 10: Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, North Carolina, Michigan State, Arizona, Villanova, Florida, Louisville, Gonzaga. What are the common denominators for all of those programs? For the top 4, it's blue blood status, right? That's a big thing. But also, every single one of those programs has a Hall of Fame coach. Like, they recruit well, but at the end of the day, they have a Hall of Fame coach. And Arizona is Sean Miller plus Lute Olson, because Lute Olson was there for a while during this period. But Villanova is not a historically good basketball program. But when they won the national title in 1985, it was the biggest upset of all time. Like, they were a bunch of scruffy dudes from Philly who beat Patrick Ewing. It wasn't, wow, Villanova's a power now. It's like Villanova is Villanova because Jay Wright made Villanova. Florida was historically terrible at basketball before Billy Donovan got there. Terrible. Like a program that might as well not, okay, they had Lon Kruger. Otherwise, might as well not even be a program that existed. Gonzaga was going to be bankrupt before Mark Few took over, before Dan Munson got them to the tournament, and then Mark Few took over. Like, all of these programs have been fundamentally built around and sustained by an elite coach, a Hall of Fame level coach, Louisville with Patina. Like, we talked about Michigan State. That's the common denominator for all of them. I don't know that there's a specific style or a specific thing that you could say, like Duke plays all sorts of different styles. Kentucky fans are starting to worry this year that Calipari stuff is a little outdated, but it's been pretty successful for like a decade. Bill Self is honestly a wizard with how he gets his teams playing and the stuff that he runs out of timeouts and stuff. Carolina's Carolina. We're going to run up and down the floor, play really fast, and rebound offensively. Everything's different, but all of those coaches are really good. They're there for a long time. They recruit really well. They have clear identities. And, yeah, the program success is built around the force of those coaches. Indiana had Bob Knight for a really long time. For all his flaws, the man was a genius-level basketball coach. It has not had a genius-level basketball coach since he was gone. And, can it be a solid to very good program without that? Yeah, I think so. It reached some of those heights during Tom Crean's tenure. But fundamentally, it needs to find a guy who, for 5 to 10 years, is one of the 10 best basketball coaches in the country. And Indiana will be just fine because the fundamentals are all there.
Well, Eamonn, thank you for taking the time this morning for joining us. Ryan, good to have you back on as well. Ryan and I will have coverage, of course, this week of the Big Ten tournament, however long that lasts for Indiana. It could be an end on Thursday, which would be a third loss to Rutgers in one season, which I have to think is not a good benchmark. There's another example, Eamonn. Rutgers was terrible when they came into the Big Ten, and Steve Peichel was going to take them to the tournament. So,
and they would have gone to the tournament easily last year too.
Right. So, yeah, we'll have all your coverage this week of the Big Ten tournament. You can follow Eamonn's work over at The Athletic, Bubble Watch, I believe, and then obviously all the coverage of the NCAA tournament. Even though Indiana is not going to be a part of that, I definitely do recommend checking that out. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Make sure you are subscribed to the show via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. Leave us a review if you enjoy the content. And we'll be back, everybody, again next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.